What is going on, my planting people? My name is Lithius and welcome to Roots Ready. In this plant diary series, I am going to be going through a couple of my plants, especially the longer standing plants, and I'll be giving you an update on their progress. Stay until the end because I will also be giving you a care guide, my top tips for keeping these plants alive and healthy as long as I did. And also I'm going to be talking about some of the challenges that I've had with each of these plants. In today's episode, I am going to be talking about none other than the string of hearts. So I looked at all of the videos that I've done in the past just to sort of see if I have spoken about this plant on this channel, and I'm not sure that I have spoken about it at length anyway. It has featured maybe once or twice, or when I'm going around sort of doing a whole house tour, you may have seen it there. But I did manage to find a couple of gems to see where this plant actually started from. When I first got this plant, it was a tiny little thing, right? I'm telling you, it had maybe about 3 individual strings. I just had it in there just growing. I made sure that I did a lot of research on this plant before I got it, just to sort of see what its care requirements were. I must say at the start, it wasn't a plant that I was head and heels over. It didn't capture my heart, no pun intended. And I think that was mainly because it was so small. It was only, as I said, a couple of strings. You'll see it in this image over here. It was just so small. But I knew this plant had a lot of potential. If you've seen the likes of the Crazy Plant Guy, if you see his string of hearts, it was beautiful. It's like this massive trailing thing, like a curtain of string of hearts. So I knew that it had the potential to get there. I just didn't know how long it would take me to get there, or if I could ever get there in the time that I've had this plant. I didn't do anything specific with this plant. I understand that it is a bit more of a succulent. It doesn't like very wet soils. It does prefer that sort of dry, arid, cacti, succulent soil mix. So that's the sort of approach I've taken to it. And that means, just like a lot of other succulents, I don't have to be running around trying to do what I need to do to keep this plant alive. But now that you've seen what this plant looked like before, and you may have spotted it in the background because it lives here among the jungle, the indoor jungle. So you may have seen it, but let me just bring you in for a closer look, because here she is. Look at that. You know what? Coming from 3 strings, thereabout, just a couple of strings, to what we have now, I must say I am incredibly impressed. And sometimes it does take you looking back to look at where you are now, just look at the progress that has come. Now, this plant is a bit deceptive, right? So what I've had to do is, it was growing so long and so quickly, it was touching the ground, and it was a bit unruly. And I thought, how can I style this plant in a way that appreciates the growth pattern, allows it to grow, because that's all it wants to do. It just wants to keep on throwing out leaves and keep tendriling. How can I do that whilst keeping it aesthetically pleasing but compact as well? And this is the solution I came up with. So it's a sort of hanging planter sort of vibe. As the leaves and the tendrils grow longer and longer, what I do is I then just wrap it around. It's not quite there yet. It's not where I want to be, because you can kind of still see the cash pole over here. What I really want with this plant is to have it completely engulf this pot. Now, it's been about 3 years now, because the photo that I showed you is from December 2020, so quite a while ago, and we're now in, well, October now of 2023. So it's been on quite the journey. So I imagine at that pace of growth, maybe this time next year, I should have a big enough plant that I can actually start plugging some of these gaps here. And I think then you can just let it sort of, yeah, it's just going to look amazing. I've got the vision. I hope you can see it too. In terms of care requirements for this plant, honestly, it is so easy to look after. As I said earlier, it is more of a succulent plant. It doesn't enjoy being wet for too long, so the soil composition that I have here is super well draining. It's got a lot of pond and perlite in here. which does mean that it dries out quite quickly. But because this is a more succulent type of plant, it's okay. What I tend to do actually is I will just soak it and I'll leave a bit of water. This is still in soil. I will leave a bit of water in there because I know that it's so dry, it gets so dry that the soil actually becomes hydrophobic. So I've got to let it just sit and then soak up the water, and it then does that. And then I have this on a maybe every other week sort of watering schedule. Even during the summer, I kind of keep it on that sort of frequency. So maybe twice a month, I'll water it. This plant has never showed any signs of slowing down, despite me going away on holiday for long periods of time or being a bit too overzealous with the watering. It's just sort of one of those ones that just keeps on going. Now, if you've had this for long enough, you might see that it starts to grow these little bulbs, and I can see some over here actually. So you can kind of see here near my finger, that's just one of the little bulbs that it grows, and they just grow along the stem. That serves a couple of different purposes. It's mainly a sort of a storage system for this plant. That's where it keeps a lot of that sort of the nutrient. It's almost like a mini potato, just think of it like that. It's a little storage, energy storage for this plant, which is why it doesn't need to be overwatered and watered too frequently, because it has that there. You can also cut those off and you can actually regrow the plant from these bulbs. And that brings us on to propagation. This, I must say, is probably one of the easiest plants to propagate. You can propagate them by a leaf, single leaf. In my experience, that takes quite a bit of time, a lot longer than you need to. But if you just cut one of the tendrils over here for a couple of leaf nodes, you stick that in some sphagnum moss, some pon, some soil, keep it damp for a little bit. It will root in no time, and then before you know it, it's off, and it grows really, really quickly once it feels established. So definitely one of the easier plants to propagate. If you haven't propagated before, you don't feel so confident, and you have a string of hearts, I would 100% suggest that you sort of start there and just get your confidence up. Another thing I really like about this plant is that it flowers without fail. You can see lots of little flowers all over the joint, everywhere. So that's really, really fun to have. But you also find that the plant does lose the flowers quite quickly. So I'm sure if I shake it, there you go, you can kind of see lots of dead leaves and mostly flowers just sort of falling off of the plant. This is one of those plants that tends to shed a little bit, so when you have it, just consider that. I have mine over a sort of a laminate sort of flooring, hardwood flooring, so it means that the cleanup of this plant is quite easy. I haven't had any pest challenges with this plant, although I do make sure that I do a lot of preventative work with this. This is not one that you would get a lot of like fungus gnats, because the soil likes to stay a bit dry and fungus gnats hate dry soils. I haven't had spider mites or any of the sort with this plant. I do just go around spraying it with neem oil, or in this case I have dusted it with some beneficial insects as well most recently. But apart from that, it's not a plant that I am too concerned about. It's not one that takes a lot of my time in terms of care. It's just making sure that it doesn't dry out to the point of death. And this plant will just keep loving you for it. In terms of fertilization, I tend to fertilize this plant around once a month. I don't think it needs any more than that. As I said, this plant does have a lot of storage bulbs. So a lot of the energy sort of stays in there. So you don't want to over fertilize. I'm sure you might have some negative consequences there, but for me, once a month, and you know, it's been doing very, very well. In my experience, this plant does appreciate light. I have it in an east facing window. It's literally right up against the window, so it gets a lot of that morning light, and it seems to absolutely love it. I wouldn't suggest you keeping this plant in a low light situation. As I said again, it's more of the sort of succulent plants. As long as it gets a good amount of light, ambient light, this plant is going to be okay. I would suggest though that however you want to display this plant, you have it in a way that the whole plant is getting access to light. So you can kind of see over here, this is the sort of the back side of the plant. It's a little bit more bare, and that's because it's always facing away from the light. But with these new grow lights that I've got here, these Sansi grow lights, you can find links to them in the description below. You can also get 20% off of these lights here. This is the folding light, and also there's an adjustable light as well. Check out the link in the description below. But since then, you can kind of see that this is starting to fill up a little bit more, because this side has been getting lots and lots of that natural morning light, and then the back is now getting that supplementary light from these grow lights. So certainly something to think about. If you're gonna have this plant, make sure that you're rotating it and keeping that on a regular schedule. That's the only thing that this plant's gonna make you do if you want it to look like this real big and bushy. But if you just want a sort of waterfall effect just on one side, then you don't need to do that. You can just leave it, set it and forget it kind of situation. But all in all, this is a great plant, a great beginner plant as well, completely gorgeous. Those lovely lush silvery leaves. It's not something that you come across very often in the plant collecting world. Most plants tend to be a bit green and, you know, just same old, but this one brings a little point of interest. The smaller leaves definitely captures your eye. I would 100% suggest that you get this plant. This is the String of Hearts. I hope you enjoyed this video, a quick look back on this String of Hearts and how far we've come together. But that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, keep planting.